You have a building that's 50% occupied. And what we want to do, now I'm going to give you a quick background, which I haven't gave Jason on it. The building had a mortgage of $1.1 million, and it went into default, along with a couple of other buildings. And the bank wanted to sell the building anyway. The current owners bought the mortgage for $1.1 million for $250,000, and they had the bank finance the mortgage. Now let me repeat that. Existing mortgage of $1.1 million that the existing owners bought from the bank and turned around and had the bank to finance the mortgage. So they owe the bank $250,000 plus $200,000 on another building, I think $450,000 or $550,000, something like that. And they're financing the building. They're financing a mortgage. The bank is giving them the money to buy their own mortgage back. Now I know that sounds crazy. So what we're going to do is discount the building at the end of the day and buy everything for $825,000. The ideal is that you're not going to put up any cash. We're going to do what you call a temporary land contract. We haven't went over those deals yet, but this will take me a few minutes. We're going to go over it, and then we're going to have discussions about it. I'm getting a little warm in here. You want to click that air conditioner back there for me? Are y'all warm too, or is it just me? It is? Just a little bit? So, this is the rent roll. These are current numbers. These are annualized numbers. Although it's 50% occupied, you don't put 50% vacancy. Assume that it is 95%, or in this case, our vacancy collection is 8%, which is pretty standard. We have operating expenses. I've reduced the taxes, so that brings it down. Our operating expenses on this property, and I'm going over this really quickly, comes to per unit. It's not on there, $3,700 a unit. We have a current net income of $130, $160 is when it's stabilized. That's when the numbers are stabilized. That means it's full and the normal rents. The appraisers will go by the market rate rents. That's good news, not what you're charging. They go by the market rate rents. So we could finance this building and borrow $1.2 million and buy everything. So what happens? You got initial closing, $30,000 cash down. $30,000 cash on a deal for $1.3 million is 2% down, 2.25% down. $30,000 down, $1.2 million mortgage is going to get discounted. We got a broker's deferred commission of $120,000 to absorb the cash, because we know at the end of the day the seller's only getting $825,000. We don't care, so we got to absorb this either by additional credits like repair credits, or you can put it on the fee. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not really getting $120,000, but I can take, because the partnership will not allow me to get it. And then that means I don't have to pay any taxes. Two things. I can charge the fee, and if I'm a part of the joint venture or not, they can prohibit me from getting it, and as the cash flow come, you get it. That way you can use your fee. Property tax and other adjustments, $100,000. The seller going to carry a notice, $1,350,000. That's how they're going to come up and buy the property, with $30,000 cash and all credits. So we now will own the property 10 days from now. Final closing is borrow $1.2 million. So at the end of the day, the seller gets $80,000, the lender gets $10,000. There's a $30,000 fee. The real fee is $45,000. That's enough money. I'm not too greedy. $50,000 is a development fee that partners get. If Jason is signing as a guarantor, then he gets a fee. Title work, property tax and adjustment. This other property tax at $100 counts security deposits and a bunch of other stuff. This is for taxes. Repairs, it's $300,000 that we're going to put in the property. Fix it up with $300,000. He needs a couple hundred at least. He got plenty of money to fix it up. So there's a contingency of $52,000 and $1.2 million. What he's just done is bought the property with no money down. $352,000 we're going to have to pull out. But what do you think you're going to need to fix it up, truthfully? 200,000. So we're going to make we're going to buy the property 100% without any cash whatsoever in it. And we're going to go over this deal and how we're going to do it. So it gets pretty clever. The land contract is called a temporary land contract. $250,000 down, $1.1 million land contract, $1.350 million sale price. So what's the real deal? It's $30,000 cash, it's $120,000 fee, and it's $100,000 in adjustments. But they will never see the fee, because they don't show fees on closing statements. They just show between the buyer and the seller. And what is settled off the closing statement is private. The bank will never, ever see it. So that's where you have your equity at that they can never, ever put their hands on. Because otherwise they found out we really didn't put any equity in. They said, you only put 30 in? When you're doing a deal, you got to think like the bank think up front. That's all you do. How's the bank going to look at this? How are they going to react to this? That's what you got to do. So you're going to get these. And what else you're going to get along with this, and I'm not going to go through it, I'm going to let you read it, it's the purchase agreement, how it would be put together. We got an amendment for a land contract, and then I'm going to send over a temporary land contract so you see the formation of what a temporary land contract is. And then I want you to go through it and study it, because next week I'm going to drill down. It'll just be us next week, and I'm drilling down. Okay, so I'm not going to take any questions right now because we have a great class today, ladies and gentlemen. I am very proud to tell you something. You can look in the mirror and say who you're going to be like in the future. We have Daron Saunders in the class, and Daron was one of the very first students in one of my very first classes. I think Daron graduated from Michigan State, and he came out. But I like Daron to spend about 25 or 30 minutes. Tell us all about yourself. And to give everybody some time to ask some questions. We like to know how it is. Everyone around this table, Daron, these are the future developers in Detroit, and they like to know how it is being you. What do you do? I mean, tell us about your big deals, maybe even your biggest deal. And just share some wisdom with us. Let's give him a hand, everybody. This is Daron Saunders.
I'd like to introduce myself. My first and foremost primary job is being the father of 3. I'm fortunate enough to have my oldest daughter, Christian Sanders. Say hello to everybody.
Hi.
Hi, Christian.
I've got 2 other kids at home. My middle child is 5, Cameron Sanders, the girl, and my youngest child is Alexander, the boy. Been married for 13 years or so, and I'll actually go back further than that so I can hopefully give you a little bit of an understanding of my overall background. Someone asked me earlier this morning, where did I grow up at? And I grew up on 7 Mile and Evergreen, right across the street from Henry Ford High School. I remember, to this day, who was it that I was talking to earlier? Oh, it was you. So you went to Benny, I went to DePores. I remember before DePores, my mom sending me to St. Mary's of Retford, which wasn't too far from here, actually. In fact, I'm going to take my daughter by there before we go back home. And I remember very vividly having to do homework after school, and when a lot of the other kids in the neighborhood didn't have to do homework, and I was mad. But I'm thankful for that experience because it taught me a little bit about what you are doing today. I mean, think about how great of a day it is. You could be out boating. I know you're a great, lovely boater. We used to dock right next to you. You could be doing a number of things other than sitting in a class with Herb Strather learning about real estate or whatnot, but you're here doing homework, so to speak. So part of, I think, the overall theme of what I'd like to share with you today is just the diligence associated with getting to the next level, and this is a part of it. So grew up, born and raised in Detroit, went to St. Mary's of Retford grade school, then I went to St. Martin de Porres High School. Tried to go to Cass Tech my freshman year, but coming out of parochial school, going to Cass Tech, as great of a school as it wasn't for me because I didn't have the discipline yet. I literally used to catch that 7 Mile Hamilton bus and keep on trekking all the way down to 1300 Bobian. And my daughter shouldn't hear this or whatnot, but I would skip school and go to Greektown and just hang out or whatnot. So my mom put me back into private school, and the nuns, I mean, literally, if you didn't show up, they would call around to your closest of kin, and if they couldn't get them, they called to your family friend, etc. So you were going to be in school. Ended up going to Michigan State, and in retrospect, if I had it to do over, I probably would have did it a little bit differently, but I'll share my story with you so you can kind of get hopefully some helpful hints from it. When I looked at what I was good at, which was math, I asked around and figured out what the highest salary would be, and that's how I chose my major. So I ended up majoring in electrical engineering, which I care nothing absolutely about. I care less about electrical engineering, but I chose my major because of a salary that I thought that I would get. And I say in retrospect, I would have done it a little bit differently because I now know that it's not so much how much money you can make from whatever it is that you can do, but it's figuring out what your passion is and what you genuinely enjoy and love. And so in retrospect, if I had it to do over, I would have done, even if it would have paid me half of what I was making as an electrical engineer, I would have done that because I would have loved what I was doing and I would have been passionate about it. And for me, it would have ultimately, in my mind, led me to what I'm doing now anyway. I just wouldn't have wasted, and I don't want to say wasted because, again, it was a great degree and I got a lot out of it, but it wasn't where my true passion was. So long story short, ended up graduating with a degree in electrical engineering, with a degree in hand. I took a job with Johnson Controls. And Johnson Controls in Michigan is known more for their automotive parts. But I actually worked for their controls group, which is why the company was initially created. Johnson Controls, as the name kind of represents, based out of Milwaukee. It did heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So I worked as a sales engineer, which was a blessing for me because it allowed me, from that standpoint, to actually understand and get an understanding of the full business cycle. So being in sales, as opposed to being an engineer after having worked at internships at Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, etc., I knew that I wasn't the guy that was necessarily going to be the one happy with sitting behind a computer, doing C++, programming or programming logic controllers, etc. Although that's a great skill set to have, it just didn't fit my personality. I'd much rather be in the mix, if you will, talking to people, understanding, like I said earlier, the full business cycle. And so part of the impetus for me ultimately wanting to get into real estate and really entrepreneurship in general was Johnson Controls sent me an offer letter that required me to come back to Detroit from Lansing. And about a month or so after accepting that offer letter, they decided that they wanted me in Grand Rapids. And I reluctantly agreed to move to Grand Rapids, and that was really where the wheels started spinning. In my mind, I said to myself, wow, someone that I've not even ever met has the ability to send me a letter and to literally send me packing to Grand Rapids. And they've got a saying on the west side of the state, and it's a beautiful part of town. Don't get me wrong, but they've got a saying, if you're not Dutch, you're not much on that side of the state. I mean, literally, and for those that look like us, I mean, you're an anomaly. But for me, that was a rewarding experience because it was literally kind of the time in which I took to just be alone and to just kind of think retrospectively of what I wanted out of life, etc. And I tell this story, and it really is, I can seriously remember almost to the date when I was looking out of my apartment windows, Water Chase Way Apartments. I looked out the windows and counted up the windows of all the apartments that I thought were in that apartment complex. And I said to myself, man, you know what? I'm paying $500+ per month for a 500 or so square foot apartment. So I counted up the windows and figured out how many other folks in that community was paying $500 a month. Didn't know anything about HJS, understanding performance and things of that nature. So in effect, I counted up all of the income, but I didn't count up any of the expenses. But I said to myself, I want to own something like this at some point because I can make $500 a month times 300. But again, in retrospect, you got to count up the water, you got to count up the sewer, the taxes, the insurance. You got a big headache if you don't count all those things up. But that was where the idea began in my mind of ultimately getting into apartment buildings. But before I got to that point, and I knew that I had to kind of crawl before I walked, so to speak. And so with that concept in mind, I knew that eventually when I got back to Detroit, and I knew it was a matter of if or a matter of when. When I got back to Detroit, I would start amassing whatever I could with whatever credit worthiness and whatever couple dollars that I had in my pocket. So if to this day you go to my office, you'll see a check from my grandmother, who, bless her heart, still living, 93 years old. She wrote me a check for $1,000 to purchase my first dwelling, which was 8331 American. And if you are, I don't know who all are familiar with that side of town, but it's bounded between Tyerman and Joy Road and Wyoming and Livernois. I mean, the block probably still doesn't even exist anymore. I mean, when we moved out, I mean, there were only probably about 3 or 4 houses on the side of the street that we bought. But nevertheless, we bought the 2-family flat from an estate sale. And I didn't have $1,000 in my pocket, but I was used to paying $500 a month rent. And I had a couple of buddies of mine that were graduated from Michigan State that were used to paying $300-400 a month. I said, hey, listen, why don't you rent out the lower unit from me, help me fix it up. I'll live in the top unit, which was a 1-bedroom. The lower unit was a 2-bedroom. And this could be a good deal. So I purchased that for $15,000 with the help of my grandmother, like I said, $1,000. And
On land contract?
no, we actually bought it. We took out a
FHA?
mortgage.
Okay.
Took out a mortgage for,
Okay.
$14,000 or so. We didn't have any repairs or anything in the mortgage or whatnot. Just $14,000. I paid $15,000. And my guy.
What year was that?
That was 1997.
Okay, 97, 20 years ago about, almost.
20 years ago. Yep. Because I graduated in 96.
10 years ago, okay.
And that was really kind of where the real estate career, if you will, was born. And in that small transaction, I learned really the principles of not only finance, but also property management as well. Now, yeah, they were my boys, and, we hung out or whatnot. We were known as the college kids, living on this block or whatnot. I remember back in those days, we were going to Carabana every year in the summer and coming back wondering if the house was going to be burglarized or whatnot. But it never was. And that's part of the lesson learned. We befriended everybody in that neighborhood, so much so that they knew we were a little bit different. We spoke a little bit different, probably dressed a little bit different. But we weren't walking up, around with our nose in the air and having that haughty look or whatnot. We were just part of the fabric of the community. And so because of that, we literally had unpaid guards watching the college boy's house, whenever we left and went away or whatnot. We didn't have threat management over here with all of the skills that he has. All we had was just how we were in that community or whatnot. So that was property management 101. And part of the finance lesson that I got out of that was, when I was getting ready to sell that property, my accountant, which was kind of a small mom and pop shop at the time, told me, hey, you don't have a lot. I don't recommend that you get an estate planning attorney, etc. And I said, you know what, your idea is a little too small for me. I know where I want to go, and I want to have an accounting team in place that allows me to get there and perhaps already has clients that are already there. So even though I only had that one single family home, I knew that when I got ready to sell, there was going to be some things that I wanted to do ultimately to grow into something bigger and better. And so I literally read every single self-help book that existed. In fact, if you come to my office, you'll see all of the books. I really believe we are what we read. I've got every book that I've ever gotten, including one that was dated 1929. If you can imagine some of the language that's in a book that's written about real estate in 1929, don't lease to colors, red line, etc. So I said, you know what, I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there were certain key principles in that book. It talked about how he took $1,000 and turned it into $1 million over time. I like to refer to it as get rich slow. And that's one of the key tenets that I would advise any and everybody that's thinking about real estate as a get-rich-quick scheme, etc. It's not. If you take your time and really look at, as my daughter likes to read, The Turtle in the Hare, be that turtle. And we just bought her a tortoise for her 9th birthday, and we were just having so much fun with it, just seeing this little tortoise, kind of crawl around the cage or whatnot. And it's emblematic to me of how wealth truly is created. It's not a fast process. It's really slow. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I want to make sure I open it up for questions and answer time. But it was with that 2-family flat that I purchased that I really kind of delved into, okay, when I do sell this property, what am I going to do? And my next move through all the readings and things of that nature that I had kind of learned was 2 things. One, I was going to bump up into something a little bit that gave me a little bit more cash flow. But then number 2, I was going to take advantage of a key technical principle that I'll share with you if Kurt hasn't already. It's called a 1031 exchange. 1031 tax-deferred exchange allows you to sell whatever it is, and let's just use simple math. If I bought something for $1 and sell it for $2, not considering all the capital gains associated with it and the tax implications, so effectively I've got a $1 capital gains, if you will. A tax-deferred exchange allows you to sell that asset for a little over $1. If I sold it for $2, to roll that full dollar, and I'll use different math. If I bought it for $100 and sold it for $200, I've got that full $100 at my disposal to be able to roll into the next deal. The only caveat to that is, 2 caveats really. One is that at that time you had to do it within a 12 to 13 month time frame, and then that if you call property A the one that you sold, property B, the one that you're buying, property B had to be of equal or greater value than property A. So I said, okay, well, if I don't need that $100 and I've got a bigger vision of growing into something bigger and better and more scale or whatnot, then I can roll that into the next deal. So, we
Without
bought
paying taxes.
without paying taxes. Good, great point. Because if, let's just say I was in a 28% tax bracket, if I had $100 and the government is going to take 28 of those $100 out of my pocket, then I've got what's left over.
Right.
Well, if you're looking at multifamily apartments or even single-family homes, $28, especially if you start putting a couple more zeros next to these numbers, that's a big number. That's the difference between perhaps buying a 10-unit building or a 5-unit building or a 20-unit building or a 10-unit building. That 28% or that $28, so again, put another zero on it, so call it $28,000 or whatnot. And as you start kind of growing into your developments or whatnot, the numbers, the math will be the same, the numbers will be just a little bit different. It's just adding zeros or what, just more zeros, but the key principles are still the same. So that's what we did. We ended up buying, I'm skipping some things in between or whatnot, but we ended up buying a 6-unit townhome complex on Ewalt Circle, 1946 through 1966. I'm like Herb now. I remember every address of every property that we've ever bought. Seriously, it's like, back in the days when we were buying single-family homes, we used to target the 15,000 block between Schaefer and I'd say Myers, going all the way maybe to Evergreen. That 15,000 block was kind of our sweet spot. So we still have some of the assets to this day. 15378 Apple Line, 15388 Apple Line, 15762 Cruise. That's what we bought up. But kind of fast forward and again full circle to the multifamilies that we purchased. We ended up buying the 6-unit townhome complex on Ewalt Circle, and for me, that was a game changer because at that time, my monthly income from my corporate job, I call it W-2 income, was about $45,000. And less taxes or whatnot, half of that. So I wasn't making a whole lot of money. But in my mind, I told my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, your mom, that if I can find a deal that makes me an extra $1,500 a month, I'm out of here. I'm out of corporate America because then I will control my time. I don't have to. And at that time, literally, I had a pickup truck and I was looking like this young man here wearing a suit with a tie on my way to Home Depot in the morning at 6 a.m. Back in those days, there was a Home Depot right on the Lodge and 8 Mile. You guys remember that Home Depot? So I would hit that real early, meet my guys there before I went to work because that's what I had to do in my pickup truck and a suit. And I work all day, and then after that, I try to tend to my business or whatnot. In my mind, if I got $1,500 extra per month, that would take me, at that time I was working for Walbridge Aldinger, that would take me out of corporate America. I can control my time and I can get up in the morning at 6 a.m. and work all day long until the next day just for myself. So it wasn't so much a matter of money, it was actually a matter of time. Like, what are you doing with your time? And if you're constantly, even if it's in the background, working 2 jobs, it's kind of like trying to have 2 wives or 2 husbands at the same time. Yeah, you might be able to try to do it a little while or whatnot, but it just works on you mentally or whatnot, and it's draining. Not that I've ever tried it, but from a job perspective, trying to work 2 jobs is just very, very difficult. So it was then that we gained that extra $1,500 a month. We bought Ewalt Circle for, I think, $130,000 or so. And we were able to roll the down payment from the sale of another asset into the purchase of that one. And that's when we really started rolling. So we bought a 10-unit apartment building. And fast forward, our first major apartment building was actually from Herb Strather. After sitting in one of these classes, it was 8331 through 8661 St. Mary's, right off of Joy Road. That was a 41-unit apartment building up. And to that point, our largest asset was about 44. I'm sorry.
Okay. You got
me, yes. Up until that time, our largest asset was actually a 26-unit in the New Center area on Seward, 741 Seward. I drove by there yesterday or this past weekend. It's vacant now. It's probably a good asset for someone. It's boarded up and probably in disrepair, but great location, especially with what's happening. 741 Seward. I know everything you need to know about that building. But we sold it, and the guy ended up losing it to the bank or whatnot. But we bought the 44-unit apartment building from Herb, and my eyes got kind of big, and I used to literally look out the door of the manager's apartment across the street at a building that we still currently own, which was Capri Manor, a 60-unit apartment building. And I don't want to say the rest is history, but morphing into purchasing, I'll share with you a little bit about the investment structure that we use. And it's really still the same, going all the way back to the first single family or the first two-family flat that we bought when I borrowed the $1,000 from my grandma. She didn't just give me that check and say, hey, here, have at it. She said, pay me this back with interest. And when we celebrated her 90th birthday, I presented that. I mean, Comerica back in those days, they sent you the canceled checks back. So I actually have the actual check. It's in my office in a display. But I had to pay her back interest, 10%. And fast forward to the deals as they got bigger and bigger, larger and larger. The down payment went from $1,000 to $10,000 to $100,000 to now $1 million. And do I come up with all of the dollars that are needed to bring that kind of equity to the table? No, I still go to grandma or the equivalent of grandma. After grandma kind of pulled out as much as she could out of her purse or whatnot, I had to go out to other investors, primarily high net worth individuals that the equivalent of $1,000 would be $100,000 to them or so. So we started syndicating deals, similar to what Herb has probably shared with you. Syndicating meaning if there's $1 million raise to do a deal, I'll pass the hat around. Literally, I heard you talking about going to church or whatnot. I don't want to use that too much as an analogy, but literally, I'll pass the hat around and say, can you put in 100? Can you put in 100? Can you put in 50? Can you put in 25? And as a result, thankfully, of our track record, it's usually very easy to do. I mean, the last raise that we did was a $6 million raise. We passed the hat around, and in 2 weeks it was full, and it went above that. I mean, we ended up raising more than that and had to tell the investors, hey, look, we can't take on any more until we get the next deal. Right. And again, that goes back to the testament of, I paid my grandma back. I paid her with interest over and above what she actually required of me. So she asked for 10%, I gave her 20%. And that's similar to what we do now, even with our existing investors. If we tell them we're going to give them a preferred return, and let's say that preferred return is X, we usually try to do X plus some. And then on the back end, when we sell it or do a refinance or whatnot, we usually try to make it a little bit better of a situation than what they originally thought. Unlike a lot of other private equity guys like myself that take on syndications that pay either quarterly or annually or semi-annually, we pay monthly. That one little tweak, just in paying monthly dividends to our investors, makes them love us. And literally, I mean, the money's there. Why not send it out? We send them an electronic, statement, ACH right into their account or whatnot. And I'll just share with you very candidly, a big part of our investor base are primarily of our Jews, of Jewish, I want to say descent or religion. Yes. But I told my wife I've been to more bar and bat mitzvahs than the average Jewish person has. But I say that lovingly because they have done very well by us, but I think a big part of that is because we've done very well by them. Another big component of our investor base includes institutional investors as well. And from an institutional standpoint, that means large insurance companies, pension systems, and entities like that are nonprofit entities, but still have to make money for their constituents. In the heyday, 2008, and I say heyday, it was heyday for us because in the downtime, that's actually when we actually acquired more assets. I mean, we did more buying in between 2008 and 2011 than what we do now. I mean, right now, prices are at a premium. A lot of owners want top dollar for their properties. I'll point the story back to Herb again and just share with you how great of a mentor, friend, and just colleague he is. 2011, Herb shared a deal with me in Farmington Hills called Lakeview Villas Apartments. It was a messy deal, but if you know anything about Herb, you know that mess and chaos is where he sees opportunity. And I'll share some of the intricacies of this particular deal, and then I'll segue into allowing you guys to ask me some questions if you have some. But this deal was so messy. I mean, a great deal, 128-unit apartment building, but the owner was a California guy that had, in our mind, over-improved the property. Went in there, put a swimming pool in it, put new windows, basically put, $1.5 million worth of improvements to this property. And I don't know if it was as a result of that solely, but I'm sure that was a component of it. He was over leveraged on this particular asset. So fast forward to kind of the trouble years, he ended up getting ready to file for bankruptcy. So part of where he found himself at when we looked at it and when Herb brought it to me was there was a court-appointed receiver. So if you think about those two things alone, court-appointed receiver, bankruptcy, and then there was one more component to it. Then there was a, what was it? The court-appointed receiver was very difficult and hard to deal with.
So was the co-broker.
Yeah.
The co-broker
So
and the bank.
So was the co-broker. Oh yeah, and the bank. And the bank, he was defaulting. He had defaulted on the mortgage or whatnot. And the bank was Flagstar. So out of all of that mess and all of that confusion, we saw a diamond in the rough. We saw a gem that would ultimately be able to be polished up. And unlike most deals that we look at, it didn't need any capital improvements whatsoever. I mean, I think our budget for it was something similar to what you just said for that deal. We only put $100,000 into it, and that was just to tell the bank that we were doing something. I mean, we really didn't have to do anything. That was to tell the bank as well as the new prospects that there was a new team in town. Change the signage, et cetera, or whatnot. The biggest thing that we had to do was re-tenant the building, because over time, when court-appointed receivers, et cetera, are in places like this, they end up pulling, basically, I don't want to call it riffraff, but the least admirable residential demographic. So, when you look at the rent log and ask, how easy was it to collect rent, I mean, they would be in arrears for several months or so. So we went in and literally went from 95% occupancy down to somewhere around 82, 83%. That seems like counterintuitive, right? Like, why would you take a property that's doing 95% occupancy and take it down? Well, we wanted to clean up the rent roll, and that's part of what we do and what we like is we see a property that either needs capital improvements, that needs the population re-tenanted, it needs new marketing, needs new branding, etc., and we go in and do that stuff. And it's not always easy. But when we went down, we are bracing ourselves like, man, we're not collecting the rents that we were used to collecting. However, we weren't collecting rents for, let's say May. We weren't collecting most of the rents until June or July in certain instances. So we got rid of those residents that weren't paying their rent in a timely basis. I'll fast forward a little bit further to, is it okay to share purchase prices and things of that nature? So we bought that property, again, with Herb's help in negotiating or whatnot for $3.4 million. When we started sensing that the market was turning and changing in the right direction for most, for us, it was the right direction on that side of the deal. On another side, when you're trying to buy and acquire or whatnot, the right side of the deal is when prices are low and depressed. So as the market started kind of steering around and getting better, we put it on the market. And we ultimately were able to sell that asset to some guys from California that actually allowed us to stay on as managing the property for another 2.5, 3 years or so. And we had a great payday, I'll say. It was a 7-figure plus payday for that particular asset. And that was just one deal, but it was because we were able to look at chaos and confusion and manage through that and see opportunity. And that's what I just saw on the people are scared of Detroit and are scared of the various things that come along with Detroit. But if you are able to see opportunity in disaster, then that's the individual that will really be successful. I mean, when everybody's chasing the same deal, and that's where we're finding ourselves now. Yeah. When we're looking at bidding for opportunities that other people are bidding against, then what? When you think about the concept of win, that means that you won the opportunity to pay the highest price for something than someone else.
That's what you did.
Yeah, that's exactly what you did. So in certain instances, we're finding ourselves being outbid by almost 2 times what we're willing to offer. Okay, you know what? If that means that you're the winner, then you can be the winner. That's no problem. So we actually look for opportunities. And a lot of times opportunities come on an off-market basis. And even though that was brokered, the broker that was brokered on that deal, he wasn't an apartment building broker. So as a result, it was kind of an off-market deal that Herb found out about, shared it with us, and it just ultimately made sense all the way around. So I know I probably went a little bit over, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of insight into our life, our story, or whatnot. And I'd love to hear your questions if you have any. Anything that I've mentioned or anything outside that you'd like to hear from me about, whatever. Questions?
Daron, just in 3 minutes, tell us the biggest deal you did, and just give us a description of the deal very briefly. Today, the biggest single transaction.
So the biggest single transaction that we did was actually an apartment building in Lansing. Oak Park Village was the previous name. We bought it for $36 million. It was a very interesting deal, and I was sharing with the gentleman that was sitting here next to me a moment ago, Terry. I was sharing with him, you always hear the cliche, think outside the box. I said, well, with Herb and guys like myself, the box doesn't even exist. I mean, there's not even a box. I mean, it's a prism or something. I mean, it's just like there's no box. And that's a testament to just really creative thinking. Because on that deal, we made an offer to Aimco, which owns some 100,000 units across the country or whatnot. And when my partner and I made the offer, we didn't know how we were going to come up with the money. The equity raised on that deal was more than either one of us had raised individually, let alone collectively together. But we knew that it was a good asset that represented something that we could do similar to Lakeview, where we can increase the rents over time because they had townhome units as opposed to just apartment units. And we knew that if we did a targeted rehabilitation program, targeted meaning instead of just going in and doing, just kind of a collage of different rehabilitation approaches, we were going to take the 2/3 of the property, which in this property was a 618 unit community. 2/3 were townhomes. We were going to literally go in every one of the townhome units and increase like the rent per square foot on it based on what we did. So we were going to change the cabinets out. We were going to do new light fixtures. We were going to do all kinds of upgrades. We were going to add dishwashers, etc. But part of the creativity that ended up having to come about with that, and it's just really necessity is the mother of invention. When we couldn't raise all of the money that we needed for this very high raise, we went to the sellers. Similar to how you probably share with your classes, and we asked them to hold paper. But they're like, oh no, we can't hold paper. We're a publicly traded company or whatnot, and the mortgage doesn't even allow for you to do that. So we read through all the documents, and literally, even though I'm not an attorney, I've grown to become one.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you to do the same over time. But I love reading documents and just devouring them, and I like to say, we not only dot our I's and cross our T's, but we like to dot our J's too. I mean, you literally go through and look at things with a fine-tooth comb. And we were able to find various loopholes that ultimately allowed us to present the sellers with a proposal that ultimately allowed them to stay in the deal to the tune of $3 million, but we paid them in as a partnership. That we included them in the partnership,
right,
so that we didn't have to encumber the property or anything like that.
Right.
But we worked out and crafted the partnership agreement such that they're actually our partners now. And we were able to get the deal, and they love us. I mean, it's been almost a year now. We've been sending them a check, every month or whatnot, and they're happy that they actually did the deal. And ultimately, they'll be paid out earlier than what they thought that they would and what we had agreed to.
Okay.
But that was the largest deal that we did.
That's cool. $36 million. Okay, I'm going to let you, the class, answer some questions now.
But if you have any questions for
If you're not
Tricia,
speechless, if you're not speechless.
Question we got missed. You said you went to school for electrical engineering, but did you mention what you really want to do as your major instead of that?
I didn't. So I eventually ended up going back to school for business, which is really my passion. I ended up going to Wayne State to get my master's in business with an emphasis in finance. I love numbers, but I love finance is really what I enjoy. And real estate, although that has turned out to be my passion, it's just an opportunity for me to do what I love, which is work with numbers and finance and putting deal structures and things of that nature together. I always wanted to go to law school. When she turns 18, I'll probably go back just to do something. But that's one of my passions as well, is combing through documents and figuring out how to make things work and using that as a means to do so.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have a question.
Yeah. I think on one of the smaller, I think it's a 60 unit, you purchased it,
Yes.
and then after a few years you sold it. What went into that? I mean, you must have thought it was a good idea when you purchased it,
Mm-hmm.
and then at some point but later, down the road, you said, I'm gonna sell it. So what went into that decision to sell after you originally bought it?
Yeah, great question. So I want to make sure I understand it correctly. Were you talking about the 6 unit or the 60 unit?
No, 60. The
60?
large-
He
yeah.
hasn't sold it yet.
So we actually still own that 60 unit. Looking to sell it, but I'll answer the question for the 6
Well, there was
unit.
another unit, though, that you purchased, and at some point, within a few years, you sold it. Well, that's what I understood.
You mean the 1031 exchange? You were telling about the 10, that was the house.
Well, the one that I did with her in
Yeah,
Farmington
yeah,
Hills, I'll give you what I think I hope
yeah.
you're looking for, and I'll just give you kind of the psychology behind why we choose to sell at certain
Because that's really what I'm,
certain times.
because normally people purchase something, they go through this long analysis, think that's a good deal, I'll purchase it.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years from now, they normally don't, unless there's something changed or,
Yeah.
and I was just wondering, what was it that caused you going in one direction, and apparently you saw something that caused you to go in another direction, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, great question. So I'll answer it in a couple different ways. The answer actually depends on the asset, but I'll give you 3 examples that I hope will give you kind of some insight. For the 6-unit apartment building, when we looked to sell that, it was primarily because at that point in time, we had increased our level of scale. We had started buying larger buildings with an emphasis on 200 to 400 unit communities. And the organizational structure that is built up, that manages the 200 unit to 400 unit property, is a lot different than the organizational structure that we had when it was just my wife and I that was built up.
Basically.
It's just, yeah,
Right.
too small. Not that it wasn't profitable, because on a per unit basis, the smaller assets are actually much more profitable than the larger ones. But part of as we started scaling and growing, my rule of thumb is if I can't afford to pay a manager at any given property of mine $40,000 or more, then that's not a property that I really want. And that's where it is right now. It doesn't mean that other assets aren't, good assets or whatnot. But for me, I want to have someone that's at least worth that kind of salary, because they're going to handle all the problems associated with that particular asset.
Otherwise, you have to almost end up handling them yourself.
Exactly.
Or getting involved or getting a high level executive to do it, and is it worth it at that point?
Yeah. And then, so the property that that Herb helped us on the transaction with, that was totally different. I mean, we could have kept that forever, and I'm sure if we would have kept it, 2 years now, and would have been looking to sell now, we probably would have made even more than what
Yep.
we made.
Mm-hmm.
However, from our perspective, we saw the market shifting, and if you think about it, things started getting a little bit better than what they were in 2008, right around 2011 or so. I mean, the economy
Yeah.
generally started getting a little bit better,
Mm-hmm.
and people started feeling better, things of that nature. So we saw that and said, you know what? Even if we leave a little bit of money on the table, meaning that even if we could potentially sell it at a later date and get more money, we'd rather strike now. And another component of why we decided to sell was because when we're looking at passing that hat around to our institutional investors, a big thing that we run into now, even to this day, is being young and not having as much of a track record as some of the older, more established companies, and in effect not having gone through a full investment cycle. Full investment cycle meaning you bought it, you fixed it up, you managed it, you increased the value, and you sold it. So we wanted to be able to check that box that disallowed effectively, the big brokerage houses that, provide private equity and smaller private equity shops with money. We wanted to be able to check it and say, nope, we bought and sold and went through that full investment cycle.
Very good. Very
So it's
good.
almost like a part of your overall strategy. In other words, you wanted to build a track record, so it may have been better for you to maybe, like you say, leave money on the table and build a track record, because that's going to allow you to do something bigger.
Correct. Now, have you guys talked about IRRs? Internal rate of return?
Returns, not really. We've just been talking about cash flows. In
Okay.
other words, we're doing some syndication when we get into it, but we haven't really done that much syndication.
Okay.
Most of this class is talking about leveraging.
Okay.
Just leveraging the asset and without having to put up a lot of cash. That's the primary goal.
Okay, all right.
But I am glad that you pointed out the difference on those smaller units and your organization being set up to handle larger units, because I've been trying to explain that to a few people. You understand?
Yeah, it just
Your
we
approach.
can't manage them as efficiently as we used to. I mean, literally, when I was going to Home Depot, I
You
didn't
do it
have to
yourself.
pay anyone $40,000-$50,000 a year. I would
You
do
were
it
it.
myself. I mean, literally, my wife, when she was pregnant with this one, used to help me change out light fixtures and things of that nature. I mean, and does it to this day better than I do. But as you start growing the organization and you have staff and health insurance and things of that nature, it's a beast. You have,
Regarding your properties, is there special circumstances with insurance or insurers, or do you self-insure any one of the entities?
So great question. We don't currently self-insure, although we're looking into it, and looking into it with a pool of other investors like ourselves. Right now, we have two go-to insurance agents that we go to that basically go out for bids once a year, usually 90 or 120 days in advance of when the policy expires. And then we'll look at the grid and compare apples to apples. And it's not always given to the one that has the cheapest premium. A lot of times, especially in Detroit, you want to get coverage with whoever you can, but then you also want to get certain exclusions not excluded. I mean, I've got certain properties where if I had really looked at the fine print, I wouldn't have allowed certain exclusions to have existed in the policy.
Go ahead.
Ron, out of curiosity, do you find this part of your investment structure to kind of basically sell certain properties in order to grow so that you can do bigger acquisitions? So it's kind of, I know that you said you got rid of the ones that was too small, but even with some of the larger ones, would you be willing to sell those so that you could acquire a bigger property the next time around?
Yeah.
And grow your overall net worth at the same time.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, and that's a great point. We definitely
Please
do
come up
look
and
to
go to the
sell
store.
to grow. And when I first started buying buildings, I literally used to fall in love with them. I mean, I would say, you know what, before I even had kids, I'm going to have that for my grandkids and this and that or whatnot. And I would just say this, and I love architecture, I love building, I love literally seeing things come out of the ground and say to myself, wow, that wasn't there, now it is. I mean, like the whole construction
Yeah,
process, I love it, I really do. But I don't fall in love with buildings anymore. I mean, and if I literally bought this thing from her right now for $1 and you told me you buy it from me for $2,
It's gone.
sold, it's gone.
There you
And
go.
that's just that's just how it is. I mean, now there's a little bit more calculation into that based on the strategy or whatnot. Part of the path to growth also includes making sure that the net worth is at a certain level. We have to have certain liquidity at all times, otherwise we'll violate certain covenants. So even if I don't put a dime into to the properties that we invest in, I've got to have the liquidity that's able to show the bank that I have the wherewithal to do this or that or whatnot. So even if I pass that hat around, they still want to look at me and know that I've got X amount of dollars in the bank, not encumbered whatsoever. It's got to be cash. So, certainly to your point, we definitely have a strategy to sell to buy.
Right. One other thing that I'd like to point out, if there are no more questions, there was one thing that was very key. Daron mentioned to you that the properties now are very expensive. Now, obviously, he buys in the suburbs, he buys outstate, in other places. You have some properties in Florida, do you?
No, not in Florida yet.
No, okay. Now, in Detroit, we're lucky because it's still psychologically depressed. When you say cap rates, tell the class what cap rates that you're looking at, Daron, so they will understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so, and everybody understands what a cap rate is? Okay. So, it's something that I look at very closely, almost daily. And I look at cap rates on a sub-market basis. So you can have a property in Farmington Hills on 10 Mile and Middle Belt, the property that I referenced earlier. That's, I would say right now probably about a 7.25, 7.5 cap rate. You can go 2 miles north and have a cap rate that's 1/4 point, maybe even 1/2 point lower than that. You come to Detroit, and I mean, I had an appraisal done on one of our
man.
properties. This was some years or so ago, but they assigned a 15% cap rate
Which
to
is
it.
outrageous.
I mean, outrageous.
You see
But
what
in
I'm talking
general, I
about?
think, Detroit's probably, if you exclude the downtown, midtown, hot pockets or whatnot, is probably about a 10% cap rate or thereabout.
Roughly 10%.
Roughly 10%. the thing that I love about Detroit, and if we were set up, we would buy much more property than what we are, is that, if you think about the definition of a cap rate, it's really a measure of risk or perceived risk. And you guys sitting in this class have the ability to reduce that risk very systematically and with all of what you're sharing with them. So even though to the outside world, and this is what we see in Michigan, if I look at it from a broader perspective, from an outside perspective, if you have anybody coming from New York, Miami, any of the coastal states, they look at a 7.5%
It's
cap
high.
rate as compared to a 4 or 3.5% cap rate that they're buying things at. So that's why it's hard for me to
It's
compete even in the Michigan
unbelievable.
market.
South of 5% cap rates. And I'm telling you, our cap rate is 9 and 10% that we have. There's tremendous opportunities. Now, the better Detroit, as Detroit improves, the risk factors go down. You understand? The desirability, the equity doesn't have to be so high because the debt rate is pretty fixed. You understand? What's going to control a lot of that is the actual equity rate itself. Instead of you needing 15%, you can take 12% and factor it in.
Yeah.
Now, what also measures this whole thing is the comps too, the prices of what other properties, so that can kind of cool it down. Because one thing about it, if you had a skinny cap rate based on the debt rate being low, it's a risky deal. Because 5 years from now, you can have a balloon, and then what you're going to do if rates went up. Think about it. If you finance something at the 4.5% rate, this is very, very low. 5 years from now, we could be sitting at a 7% interest rate, which is average. Kind of our average interest rate is around 7. So, at one point, I remember when the interest rate the bank loaned you, I got a brand new mortgage from First Federal, and the rate was 12%. And that was the prime, that's the best rate you can get. You understand what I mean? So cap rates, we have a play in cap rates that's off the hook right now. So as the city improves, the cap rates are gonna drop, so our values are gonna just jump. So we have a chance, because it's psychological, that we can take and buy properties, really over leverage them. Not over leverage them, but we could buy them with 100% leverage without being over leveraged. Still have 150% debt coverage. And buy property and buy property without having to put cash in. So that's very good. Let's give a round of hand, y'all. Ron, we just thank you very, very much. And your brother Christian, it's wonderful. I just keep thinking she do look like you, but her mother must be beautiful. You understand?
She is.
Yes, I can appreciate that.
Yeah,
So we thank you. You are definitely an alumnus, and we are doing deals with Daron. The Apple Eye deal. This is maybe our guy right here, and keep that Joy Road. Just keep it soft. We'll be back to it very closely, very soon.
All right. Thank you.
Daron.
Thank you all.
Yes.